Conquest was born to, conquer. He's definitely one of the fiercest Viltrumite warriors out there, so much so that even Omni-Man respects him despite being mortal enemies. I won't beat around the bush and extend this intro more than it needs to be extended. So, in here, I'll explore Conquest's anatomy, and once that's done, I'll briefly explore his arc in the comic and what you can expect in the future episode. Of course, there will be heavy spoilers. And now, let's begin. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How old is Conquest? So, it's a fact that Viltrumite aging slows down as they grow older. You've seen Mark grow from an infant to a young man, and soon he would become an adult. However, once he reaches adulthood, his aging would slow down, and it would be long before he begins to look old. I mean, people like Nolan have been around for 1,000 years or more, and it still looks like they're in their early 40s, right? Now, when you compare the likes of Nolan or Anissa with Conquest, he looks visibly old, somewhat like a 60-something-year-old man. This only means that Conquest is several thousand years old, maybe even tens of thousands. No wonder he's one of the fiercest and most experienced warriors of the Viltrumite Empire. Was he totally immune to the Scourge virus? We've already established that Conquest was several thousand years old. He was born on Viltrum, a planet whose civilization was one comprising the cruelest of conquerors the universe has ever known. Needless to say, all that rage and violence that he saw from his people from a young age corroded him from within, darkening his very heart. He fought in the Viltrumite Civil War, when half the Viltrumites were killed by the other half. Of course, he survived this war and started working toward the uncontrolled expansion of the Empire. However, that came to a stop when the victims, or enemies of the Viltrumite civilization, decided to fight back. With the help of Thetis, those who had once been subjugated by the Viltrumites joined hands and constructed a virus that would attack the Viltrumites. In fact, Thetis himself offered his DNA as a base for building the virus. Known as the Scourge virus, it killed nearly 99.9% of the Viltrumites. So much so that when the Invincible comic started, there were hardly 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites in existence. Yes, Conquest survived the plague, but that does not mean that he was completely immune to the virus or never contracted it. Like every other Viltrumite, even our guy was infected by the Scourge virus, which left him weak and vulnerable. In fact, he became so weak that Ragnar managed to tear off his right arm, scar his face, and blind his right eye. Later, he would get prosthetics. However, the question remains, how did he manage to survive? How and why did he survive what killed 99.9% of Viltrumites? Well, in order to answer this, I must dig a bit into Mark's encounter with the Scourge virus. You see, the original strain of the virus killed nearly all Viltrumites, but a few of them still remained. Then a newer and stronger strain was created. According to Thetis, this new strain has the potential to kill every Viltrumite. Although Thetis died in the Battle of Viltrum, Alan the Alien was determined to unleash the virus. The only small hiccup was that by now, the Viltrumites were living on Earth, since their planet had been destroyed, and unleashing the virus on Earth meant that humans would also get infected and perish. Naturally, Mark was not on board with this plan and resisted Alan, and this led to Mark getting exposed to the virus. What next? He fell sick and became weak. In fact, he nearly lost all his powers, but regained his full potential soon enough because he had royal Viltrumite DNA. Now, I believe that Conquest also survived because he had a superior and more ancient DNA in him. In fact, Nolan probably survived the virus because of the same reason. After all, he was the son of Emperor Argal and heir to the Viltrumite throne. The cyborg arm that shattered planets. Conquest's deadly prosthetic explained. Well, as I mentioned a while ago, Conquest lost an arm to Ragnar, and it was replaced by a cybernetic one later on. Now, this arm was a fully functional one. He could open and clench his fist too, which meant that his punches could feel more painful. For comparison, imagine punching someone with your bare hands as opposed to punching them with a metallic fist. Of course, the latter would pack a heavier punch, wouldn't you agree? Conquest could very well destroy the strongest of fighters, and with nothing but a punch and some uber awesome swag. Just how strong are Conquest's lungs? Conquest has an extremely enhanced lung capacity, meaning that he could hold his breath for extraordinary periods of time. While most Viltrumites can hold their breath for 2 weeks at a time, Conquest may have a stronger breath-holding capacity, given that he's a much older Viltrumite. I mean, humans are not very different from Viltrumites, bereft superpowers. By that logic, if a human practices, he could hold his breath for extended periods of time. Similarly, someone like Conquest might have more lung strength than his brethren. How strong is Conquest? Viltrumites are strong enough to juggle tanks, blast through armored spaceships, and smash through entire city blocks if they let loose. They pull off feats that appear impossible to the average onlooker. This raw power is one of their main calling cards, and it usually sets the tone for any confrontation. A regular Viltrumite can snap bones with minimal effort and lift incredibly massive loads. They also punch with such force that their enemies feel the impact for miles. No one knows the exact upper limit of a Viltrumite's strength because it varies from individual to individual, and a determined Viltrumite often pushes well beyond what anyone expects. Now, Conquest is one of the most determined of Viltrumites, and in that capacity, he can move mountains and not die trying because he definitely can move mountains, or at least destroy one. Omni-Man, one of the most famous Viltrumites, has hurled giant spaceships through Earth's atmosphere and leveled entire armies on his own. Invincible, his half-Viltrumite son, matched the might of cosmic threats long before reaching his full potential. That suggests there's more to Viltrumite strength than muscle. Compared to that, Conquest is a beast of beasts. When he unleashes a punch, it shatters more than bone, it breaks wills. He fights with an intensity that feels primal. Combine that with combat training honed from childhood, and you get a warrior who sees violence as an art form. He shows no hesitation to trade blows with the biggest threats in the galaxy, because that's how he's learned to prove himself, and that's how he earns a worthy life. That warrior ethos pairs well with his super strength, so he rarely backs down, no matter the odds. Conquest can fly and can manipulate gravitational force. Flight is another hallmark of Viltrumite power. His ability to fly comes from an internal power, likely linked to the way his body manipulates energy or gravitational forces. He can take off at will and zip across continents, or into orbit without breaking a sweat. His precision in flight is also remarkable, allowing him to hover in place, accelerate to supersonic speeds, and stop on a dime. This movement extends to space travel. A Viltrumite like Conquest can leave a planet's atmosphere under their own power. Our mad titan of a Viltrumite can cross large distances without slowing down too much, although he still needs to breathe eventually, so an extended journey in the vacuum of space presents certain risks. Many Viltrumites have soared from one celestial body to another, covering vast stretches of space at speeds that rival advanced spaceships. From supercells to space radiation, what's inside a Viltrumite's body? Viltrumite cells are like tiny fortresses. They hold up against the vacuum of space, cosmic radiation, and near absolute zero temperatures for short bursts. These cells also process energy in more efficient ways than humans ever could. In Conquest's case, those cells had decades, maybe centuries of adaptation under their belt, making him nearly untouchable. Everything from muscle fibers to bone structure is denser, able to withstand collisions that level city blocks. Conquest even used the absence of air as a weapon. If he pinned Mark or Oliver in orbit, he expected them to pass out from a lack of oxygen before he did. A Viltrumite can briefly store enough oxygen in its body to continue fighting, flying, or punching through a building. This species doesn't need bulky suits in space. Can you clone a Viltrumite? What Conquest corpse taught Earth scientists? After Mark beat Conquest the first time, Cecil Stedman tried to harness Viltrumite DNA by reanimating alternate Mark corpses from the recent multiversal invasion. He realized that standard procedures fell flat. The tissue was too dense for surgical tools and the standard reanimation cocktail. Scientists who studied Conquest's body learned that every cell braced itself against outside tampering. Attempts at collecting samples usually broke scalpels or wore out lasers. Whatever sample they did gather deteriorated under normal lab conditions. People have asked if anyone can grow an entire Conquest 2.0 in a lab. So far the answer is no. Viltrumite cloning hints the same problem that reanimation did. The cells are built to resist unnatural manipulation. Conquest's remains provided a roadmap of the challenges. His DNA might be nearly immortal, but it's also extremely picky about how it multiplies. Without specialized Viltrumite or Coalition of Planets technology, Earth cloning labs remain stumped. Does he grow stronger as he ages? Conquest showed up with wrinkles around his eyes, which might suggest a decline in physical might. But as Mark learned, appearances can be deceiving. Viltrumites do grow stronger with age, up to a point. Their bodies refine raw power over centuries. Conquest's encounters with Nolan happened when Nolan was younger and less experienced, so Conquest had the upper hand. By the time he faced Mark, he had centuries of practice in direct, no-holds-barred fighting. Each scar had honed his skill. Each triumph had boosted his confidence. Age didn't slow him down, it made him sharper. That doesn't mean a Viltrumite can become unstoppable just by being old. There's a threshold where raw strength levels out, though skill and cunning continue to improve. Conquest reached that sweet spot where he had enough raw power, stamina, and arrogance to challenge anyone he pleased. His defeat came at the hands of Mark, who had a similar physiology but a younger and more determined spirit. Mark also learned from earlier mistakes, plus he had the emotional edge of defending loved ones who were in danger. In that desperate moment, he locked Conquest in a death grip and refused to let go. No matter how powerful or experienced Conquest was, he couldn't break free in time to save his own life. The DNA secrets that made Conquest nearly immortal. Viltrumite physiology is the stuff of nightmares, or dreams if you're on their side. Their DNA anchors them in a state that slows cellular decay to a near halt. This allows them to endure centuries with minimal aging. Conquest, for example, roamed the cosmos for a span that dwarfed Mark's lifetime by a huge margin. He faced countless battles, got ripped open, and still kept going. Scientists who studied samples from his remains, once they got the chance, found an extraordinarily stable genetic structure. These genes regenerate soft tissues more effectively than human cells ever could, which explains why Conquest popped out of that Mojave Desert prison with a full body repaired. That near immortality is an absolute. If someone manages to suffocate or obliterate vital organs, a Viltrumite can die. But it takes so much punishment to get there that most enemies drop long before a Viltrumite does. Conquest's advanced years were a badge of honor. Each century proved his resilience. That unstoppable vigor came directly from his genes, each strand supercharged to hold muscle strength, bone density, and regenerative processes at peak levels. The injuries that might flatten a human for good were more like temporary setbacks for him. The battle damage paradox: why Conquest refuses to heal his scars. You'd think a being blessed with near immortality would have pristine skin. Not Conquest. Those scars were trophies. He could have relied on advanced Viltrumite healing to erase them, but he chose not to. With each nasty mark, he kept a reminder of past battles, a trophy on display for the next adversary. It became part of his legend, a promise to anyone who faced him that he had survived worse, and he had zero plans to back down. Conquest also wore a cybernetic arm for a similar reason. His real limb was gone, but he rarely tested regeneration for it because the mechanical replacement worked fine. Plus, it looked menacing. The Empire had access to medical technology that might have kickstarted the regrowth process, but Conquest's entire persona revolved around intimidation and unrelenting violence. He embraced the scars as proof of his unstoppable nature. A brief look at Conquest's life. Conquest arrived in the aftermath of the Invincible War, when Mark Grayson was already in a fragile state. The global conflict called the Invincible War had left countless people dead and entire cities in ruin. Mark struggled with guilt, since evil versions of him from parallel universes had caused the carnage. Though Mark in our reality was innocent, the media still pointed fingers in his direction. During these grim days, Conquest appeared with a simple mission: remind Mark of his Viltrumite duties, conquer Earth or face extermination. The guy wasn't your typical run-of-the-mill alien. He had an aged look, with scars across his face and a robotic arm that hinted at an extremely violent career. Unlike Anissa or Nolan Grayson, Conquest did not pretend to care about Earth or the Viltrumite Empire's formalities. He cared about one thing: unfiltered violence. The Viltrumite Empire often held him back, but now it had unchained him to deal with Mark. For Conquest, nothing beat a good brawl. Mark had a real temper at that point too, having watched civilians die in droves and seeing his girlfriend, Adam Eve, barely clinging to life in a hospital bed. Conquest's timing was perfect. Mark had been waiting for an outlet. When Mark and Conquest first collided, relief workers nearby almost got swept up by the shockwave. Conquest flew Mark through buildings and smashed him around so easily it bordered on sadistic. Mark tried banter, reminding Conquest that the Earth had potential, but Conquest was never big on conversation. He lived for fists, broken bones, and carnage. Mark fought back hard though. Rage pushed him forward. He even launched Conquest out of Earth's atmosphere. But Conquest grinned the entire time and inflicted damage on Mark, until Mark's eye turned bloody and swollen. Oliver, Mark's younger half-brother, joined the fight. Conquest reacted like a pit bull spotting a tiny dog. He tried to rip Oliver in half. Mark saved his life, but Conquest still broke Oliver's arm and caused severe injuries. At one point, Conquest pinned Mark down, rubbed in the fact that he was older than Mark's father, and made it clear that he had centuries of experience. Doctors in the US government scrambled for a way to help. Cecil Stedman, the head of a secretive security force, ordered D.A. Sinclair to reanimate corpses of alternate Marks from the recent multiversal war, figuring they might pack the same punch Mark did. No luck. Viltrumite DNA was too dense for the standard reanimation procedure. Adam Eve, fresh out of a coma, burst onto the scene next. Conquest, seeing a new target, nearly cut her down. In fact, he impaled her with brutal efficiency, mocking Mark for failing to protect her. Mark reached a next-level fury and tried to kill Conquest on the spot. He landed brutal blows that shattered Conquest's cybernetic arm. Conquest relished the onslaught. Mark even bit off a piece of his flesh. That's how savage things got. Suddenly, Adam Eve revived herself by unlocking a backup plan in her own powers. Her matter manipulation overcame the mental blocks installed years ago. She reformed her body and blasted Conquest with a massive energy beam, searing a good portion of his skin. This created a brief opening for Mark, and the two hammered Conquest until he finally went down. Conquest's face was left a bloody mess, battered beyond recognition. Mark and Eve passed out from the stress and injuries. The Guardians of the Globe, Young Blood, Savage Dragon, and others arrived for cleanup. Mark woke up days later with a fractured skull, a broken hand and forearm, and a busted leg. Eve's powers had saved her, and she confessed she could manipulate living tissue under intense emotional trauma. Life seemed to grant Mark and Eve a small victory, but Conquest's story didn't end there. Cecil tricked Mark by displaying a fake corpse. The real Conquest was locked away in a 400-ton prison in the Mojave Desert. Viltrumite physiology worked its weird magic once again, and Conquest healed. The moment he felt strong enough, he escaped and flew off to a Viltrumite warship. Grand Regent Thrag nearly executed him for failing to conquer Earth, calling Conquest no better than an animal. But the Empire needed every warrior in the upcoming Viltrumite War, so Thrag let him live and ordered him to try again. During the Viltrumite War, Conquest led an assault against the coalition of planets. He practically tore through an entire ship and faced down Mark, who thought Conquest had died back on Earth. Their rematch ended with Mark grabbing Conquest and holding him in an oxygen-free environment, determined to suffocate him. Conquest, in a final horrifying move, disemboweled Mark. Mark still refused to let go. He squeezed Conquest's throat until his old foe died once and for all. Nolan, Omni-Man, Mark's father, chose to bury Conquest's body, honoring him as one of the Viltrumite Empire's greatest warriors, twisted as that might sound. That's Conquest in a nutshell, an unstoppable force of aggression, fueled by Viltrumite biology. He handled his advanced age like a deadly advantage, always grinning in the face of shattered bones and lethal wounds. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.